بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صباح الخير. Good morning. It's my pleasure to join this distinguished group and meeting. First, I would like to thank the Library of Alexandria, Dr. Ismail, for inviting me to join. And this morning, we have a very distinguished panel. I'm going to do the introduction at the beginning, and I will not make any comments until the very end. I've asked kindly the participants to have about 10 minutes of presentation, plus or minus, so that we can allow the opportunity for a debate. We're starting now at almost 5 to 10. Our session is an hour and a half, so we should have a good time for discussion, debate about this very important, timely, and crucial issues that we started yesterday. Our panel has this morning His Excellency Mr. Tahir Al-Masri, as said, His Excellency Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Twigri, our distinguished Dr. Abdul Mun'im Saeed, and the Professor Nasim Ahmed Shah. And we have as well with us Ms. Noha Omar as a rapporteur. It'll give me a great pleasure to introduce His Excellency Mr. Tahir Al-Masri.
صباح الخير. أنا ستكون مداخلتي.
My intervention here will be in Arabic. I would like to ask you a question. Who protects stability? The power or the state? In this place, here we will have a day, for a day and a half almost, we discussed the reasons of related to democracy and stability and security. Okay, so I want to ask a non-traditional question about this issue, because power and the state are two issues that haven't been dealt with in a clear way in the and for the after the Arab Spring we faced many issues. We had lots of confrontations in our states, and the current trends are related to building the authorities. So, related to the difficulties, the economic difficulties that we currently face, the issues related to the authorities and the governments that control all things related to the people and the means of expressions, and the dictatorships have prevailed. And for that reason, the Arab Spring wanted to change these issues. So we had strong Arab leaderships, competent leaderships, and even one of these leadership was asked about the number of populations, and they said around 13 people only. And in reality, after the Arab Spring and after the terrorism that hit our societies,
المصائب التي توصمنا بالهمجية والوحشية والقسوة. فنحن هناك
So we have to pay attention to our internal issues, because terrorism comes from a source and it is received by some countries in order to be exploited by these countries. And the terrorism revolt against the way the state is organized. And as for the issue of the Arab Spring, we have a revolutionary public revolution by the youth, so that we can put an end to such syntheses that include corruption, administrative and financial corruption. And the Arab Spring wanted to restore the dignity of the human being. However, it was kidnapped by the state of sedition. And some countries restored their traditional ways of extremism and of the autocratic regimes, and we didn't achieve what we actually aspire to achieve. And maintaining the balance between the power and the state and how to create democratic security, it is a difficult issue, and it should be very meticulous and accurate, because it will result in a lot of issues. For example, a balanced the constitution and the balance between the authorities of the states, so that no state would prevail over the other. I'm from Jordan, and we have a constitution that strikes a balance between the authorities. However, every now and then we face many complaints and misinterpretation of the constitution. So, talking about the rights and obligations of the citizen and of the government, it is an issue that should have a priority while talking about the rotation of power, because this is a very important issue for all the Arab citizens, because the Arab citizens have had enough of the struggle they are facing because of the social problems and calling for reform and democracy. And a lot of times many people just go around these concepts, and still the power control the citizen. And there should be a change to this situation, because we still, as Arab societies, we still have problems to face, and we have different levels of problems. We have a kind of disparity, and as what happens in the many Arab states, and we have the issue of the Palestinian crisis. And now, according to the new president-elect of the American president and the Israeli authorities, we will have lots of issues that will be of great concern to the Arab people. However, the reactions concerning this point or these procedures will be confined and will be limited to some kind of considerations, particularly in Jordan, and this will increase the feeling of the Jordanian and Arab citizen that they don't have dignity and they are humiliated And these dark powers and these dark groups will stay around us so that they can exploit another opportunity to attack. So the issue of democratic security, it is a very nice issue, of course, and good issue, but we need to work hard and exert a lot of effort so that the authorities and the leaderships would build and put the infrastructure for work for the democratic action, political action, including the parties and the constitutional institutes, so that we can strike a balance between all of this. So I wanted to raise the issue of the power and of the state. We want to focus on building the state in such a real way so that we can maintain security and stability and also build the state, a democratic state. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Dr. Abdulmenem Said.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like at the beginning to thank the Library of Alexandria and thank particularly my friend Ismail Serageldin twice. One for inviting me and one because of the topic of this meeting. Democratic security is in itself a very difficult and complicated, two concepts really coming together. In fact, at the first glance, there is nothing secure about democracy and nothing really democratic about security. And putting them together put us in the face of many challenges to the idea of democracy and liberalism in general. Actually, we have two major threats now. One we will handle in this meeting, and the other one probably it will be a subject of another meeting. There are two major threats to liberal democracy now. One is populism, and second is terrorism, the subject of matter of our discussion. There is now an avalanche of literature about populism and what it is doing for liberal democracy. And I advise with both articles in Foreign Affairs, the last issue in which Farid Zakaria wrote about populism on the march, why the West is in trouble, and also Sherry Perman article, Populism is not fascism, but it could be a harbinger. So coming close to fascism again, it will be the central thesis of my presentation. I will start first by refuting a major theory that's prevailing in the Western literature that looking at the subject matter. Two related reasons are dominant in the Western literature. The first is that terrorism is only a symptom of much deeper root causes related to the dysfunctions of the Middle East state. The literature refers to underlying grievances that, if pervasive, will generate terrorist groups. And the second is that terrorism is merely an excuse to avoid reform and stamp out political opposition. This approach is refutable on both empirical and policy grounds. The Global Terrorism Index cited terrorism in 162 countries from 2000 until 2013, during which terrorist operations and number of casualties has been on the rise. However, terrorism and extremism are concentrated in a number of countries. In 2013, the victims are in 5 countries. 80% of victims are in 5 countries: Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Syria. All have Muslim Brothers organizations, plus a cocktail of other militant organizations from Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan to Al-Qaeda in these 2 countries and others, ISIL in Iraq and Syria, Boko Haram in Nigeria, and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. In the top 10 countries, in addition to the 5, there are Somalia and Yemen. In the next 10 countries, Egypt, Lebanon, Libya, and Sudan will be added. The highest region in the world for militancy and extremism is the MENA region, where 53% of all suicide operations occurred. The Global Terrorism Index had refuted the prevailing theory in the West of root causes when it stated that there is no systematic link to poverty measures or to several broader economic development factors, such as Human Development Index, or the subcomponents such as the mean years of schooling or life expectancy. Similarly, economic indicators such as year-to-year GDP growth do not correlate. Instead, the Global Terrorism Index suggested that from thousands of socioeconomic governance and attitudinal variables, three groupings of indicators show a multivariate significant relationship with Global Terrorism Index: political stability, intergroup cohesion, and legitimacy of the state. The Global Terrorism Index noticed, in addition, that despite the secessionist movements were in 2000, the main source of terrorism, religion, was soon to get to the competition, particularly in the MENA region, where it was the cause of 80% of terrorist operations. In addition to the Global Terrorist Index, both Gallup and Zogby polling in the Middle East in June 2015 reflect the same conclusions. Religion, or religious radical model and paradigm of governance, is then the major correlating factor behind terrorism that comes to the fore, not to address grievances or to deal with the root causes of suppressive governments, but rather because an ideology got a completely different model of the state that showed in Egypt in the form of the 2012 constitution and the Islamic State, to deliver not an authoritarian state, but a totalitarian one. In reality, the world has reached another fascist moment. And that's my major argument, that actually we are in the world facing a fascist moment, and this fascist moment is coming from the Middle East, plus it is emerging now in the West. The fascist movement, like the perfect storm, expresses the nature of a period of time that sweeps into the histories of people and nations in a flash. It is a period of upheaval, quakes, hurricanes, a period in which events range out of control and in which the system, human or material, only regains equilibrium after great violence and destruction. Historically, the fascist movement arrived in the wake of major changes brought, for example, by the French Revolution and its repercussions, from the Napoleonic Wars to the rise of labor and socialist movements. These triggered conservative backlashes that eventually turned racist against minorities in European countries and against non-white countries elsewhere. As Nazism and fascism had been the byproduct of Western political thought in the 18th and 19th century, radical Islamism is a byproduct of Islamic political thought that goes back centuries ago. Three political theories have dominated Islamic political thought about the origins of power and authority in the state. Immediately after the death of Prophet Muhammad, his followers were divided between three schools of thought. The first, power should be invested in the family of the Prophet or the people of the house Al-Bayt. Those were known historically as Shia. Second, power should be invested on those who are capable of ruling by numbers, cohesion, or asabiyya, as Ibn Khaldun described them, and of course, the sword. Those were called Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or the people of Sunnah and community. In short, Sunni Islam stated that governance should be in the hands of rulers who are guided by the Quran and the sayings and behavior of the Prophet. Third, Power should be invested in terms, power should not be invested in terms of bloodline to the prophet or for those who could rule through force, but should be invested in God and his words. وَمَا الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَهَؤُلَائِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Power is only for God, and those who do not rule by the words of God are infidels. Those were known as the Khawarij, or rebels, who came out from the division of Muslims between Shia and Sunnah. They were the revolting third party who established al-Hakimiyya doctrine. These three parties of Islamic political thought had fought each other early in Islam in what's now known as the Great Sedition or Al-Fitna Al-Kubra. They continue to be part of the Islamic lexicon of rivalry and competition today. The Khawarijites have faded with Islamic history for long periods, but they have never entirely vanished. The resurgence in the modern era was marked by the birth of the Muslim Brothers in Egypt in 1928. In general, they would re-emerge in times of weakness or slackness in the face of violent foreign pressures, as occurred during the time of the Crusades. Today, they are re-emerging against the backdrop of the chaos of the post-Arab Spring era and the collapse of several Arab states. The inspiration of these groups derives, as it always has, from a core of consummately fascist ideas. The first being the claim to an exclusive monopoly on the absolute truth. The second is the quintessentially bigoted and even racist conviction in their superiority to all others. A fourth trait is a complete lack of any concept for the development of or umran of the earth, which helps explain their hostility towards civilization, both old and new. What's to be done? It is important to draw a distinction between terrorists and terrorism. The first being an organization that can be degraded, destroyed. The second is an ideology that has to be fought, which is more difficult. Now we can be sure that the Islamic State Caliphate straddling Syria and Iraq will cease to exist. There is sufficient evidence that this entity is receding and that its forces are fleeing. The international and regional coalition has Mosul and Raqqa in its sights and is determined to put an end to the Islamic State, and perhaps the only cause of delay is that the coalition partners are not looking at the result of the battle, but at the shape of the Middle East to come, which is the focus of the current diplomatic and political battle. To be frank, defeating terrorism is above all an Arab and Muslim's task. This is not because we are solely responsible for the rise of this phenomenon. Many other countries, groups, and factors played a part, such as the United States and allies' occupation of and subsequent withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan, and the treatment of Arab and Muslim minorities abroad. However, we are the ones at risk from the constant propagation of terrorists, and we are the first victims and the first to be accused of terrorism. To this, we could probably add another reason. We are the ones who have the greatest capacity to contend with Khawarij in the realm of ideas, and also to wage the battle for hearts and minds, at which we should admit the Islamic State has acquired considerable skills. Islamic State is the fourth generation of terrorists, the first being the Muslim Brotherhood movement, the second Al-Jama'ah Al-Islamiyya and Jihad movements and their many derivatives, and the third Al-Qaeda. Each generation, in one way or another, branched off from its predecessor. So the four have remained at once mutually compatible and antagonistic. In all events, they all seek to use various means to demolish the contemporary Arab states. They are all characterized by a militant religious rhetoric. The former is used to fire zeal and muster support, the latter to organize, terrorize, and kill. Instruments have ranged from sermons and doctrinal tracts to conspiracies and assassination, and from televised and video filmed messages to social networking media. Each generation seized upon the historical moment and technologies of its time in order to channel them toward the most malevolent ends in the name of Islam. While the mother movement and the first generation paved the way and succeeded in developing an international presence, the fourth generation is more vicious and more widespread. This is the generation that set the vision of the caliphate on the beginning of the course to realization in the minds of young people across the world, linked up through Twitter and Facebook around the clock. In his book, The United States of Jihad, which studies the case of 330 American jihadists, Peter Bergen mentioned that from September to December 2014, some 46,000 Twitter accounts were working for Daesh or ISIS. In addition, YouTube is used very efficiently to drive home the idea of victimhood and disseminate the psychological disposition, as well as to advertise the power to slaughter, exact revenge, and turn anger into an ode to destruction. Those long and boring sermons broadcast by al-Zawahiri to his disciples are a thing of the past. So too is the need for extensive jurisprudential arguments to justify terrorism. This is the age of colorful video clips that stimulate sick imaginations with the best senses of murder, abduction, terror, and destruction. Ultimately, what you have is an intricate network focused on arousing the vilest sentiments and the crudest minds and driving them, whether now or in the future, to acts of destruction against contemporary societies. Whether Raqqa falls today or tomorrow, the battle against this phenomenon will continue for a long time. Moreover, it's the type of war that will require more than the wisdom of politicians. Okay, I apologize to the interpreters for my speaking fast, but I'm getting to a close here. Moreover, this type of war that will require more than the wisdom of politicians and the genius of generals. Yet, while a large body of literature on terrorism and terrorists has accumulated, especially in the West, that which has emerged so far from Arab and Islamic countries has been neither comprehensive or profound. The prevalent approach to combating terrorism rests primarily on the idea of renewing religious thought and relying on official religious establishments to undertake this task. This is not sufficient. In fact, its potential is limited because the renewal may sometimes offer nothing really new, something that draws a clear distinction between what the former Grand Imam of Egypt, Ali Goma, referred to as source-based Islam, based on the Quran and the true Sunnah, and chronological Islam, in which the faith and creed were affected by the viciousness of time, changing historical circumstances, and personal or political interests. The fact is that the current religious institutions, as centrally important as they are still very traditional and conservative. They are worried, legitimately so, by the possibility that the defense of Islam may be confused with an attack against it. Since the ideological battle requires much more, the place to start with is the acquisition and processing of knowledge. This in turn requires institutions and organizations that are specialized in the study of terrorism, but that differ from those that currently exist in the framework of the security establishments in the Arab world as counter-terrorist agencies in these countries are concerned primarily with defeating terrorists as opposed to eliminating the ideological roots of the phenomenon. Perhaps the first task of a specialized research organization should be the study to the cases of the terrorists who have been arrested, whether before or after committing a terrorist act, and whether or not they are serving sentences. There are thousands of terrorists in Arab prisons, and there is abundant information about their social, economic, and cultural background. This could give us the starting point of studying what makes a terrorist, why killing to him is from physical and mental pleasure. More importantly, what ideas made him run blindly into the arms of terrorism and Islamic states in particular. Civilian research institutions applying the latest scientific research methods should also attempt to identify the deviant point, the point where the readings of the true face turned into destructive readings. In general, fascist ideologies depend primarily on two basic elements. The first is the de-intellectualization of people, which entails avoiding the human intellect of everything to do with rationality and the comprehension of causal relations and evolutionary and revolutionary transformations, and then filling that void with a rudimentary logic informed by behavioral instincts and programmed so as to render people blindly obedient to a group of radicals who lay claim to some form of magnificence. People from the warriors of ancient Sparta to the followers of the 20th century fascists, communists, socialists, and Nazis offer examples of this reduced mental state. In our contemporary times, the believers in all they are told by Al-Qaeda, Daesh, ISIS, the Islamic State group, and the Muslim Brotherhood before that also fall into this category. The second element is the grand idea, often imperialist in nature. It promises the revival of an ancient glory or the advent of one to come. The idea tends to carry a notion of ineluctable destiny, when secularists such as fascism, Nazism, and communism, it takes the form of a logical imperative. When religion, it is divinely ordained, which is what all terrorist groups claim. Fascist ideologies has given birth to such grand ideas as the revival of the Roman Empire, the Third Reich, the Communist International, and the Islamic State Caliphate. The idea of the Caliphate has contained a symbolic power that kings and intellectuals sometimes tried to revive, and more importantly here, that has become today a means to attract and recruit terrorist elements to defend the so-called caliphates with its fluctuating borders in Syria and Iraq. I will try now to conclude by saying, certainly, there is much more involved in this question about the door is open to more input theologically and factually. However, we must bear in mind that the current conflict, which extends over a vast geographical expanse, will remain with us for a period of time that's impossible to calculate at present. Since this is the case, an important part of the current process of resistance will still need to rely on various sources of strength, so the economic or military, as well as on the political art of building coalitions and interacting with regional and international stakeholders in the conflict, while taking these stakeholders' other particular interests into account. Nevertheless, the ideological facet of the battle remains extremely crucial, not just for the purpose of preventing terrorist recruitment process, but that are taking place in Arab countries and elsewhere in the world, but also to erode the ground that terrorist organizations acquired in Arab countries and societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Nasim, please.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In this session, we are discussing the perspective of Muslims and their response towards the current world scenario. Therefore, I shall suggest some attitudes that Muslims across the world could adopt to reinstate an era of understanding, tolerance, and coexistence. Because these are the three principles of reconciliation that may pave the way for world peace and prosperity. In the beginning, I feel it my privilege to be amid a galaxy of great scholars and leaders. I wish to extend my heartfelt thanks to the most respected brother and friend, Dr. Ismail Serageldin in particular, and the authorities at the Library of Alexandria in general, whose sincere desire and passionate invitation brought me here. In fact, Egyptian nation is fortunate to have in Dr. Ismail a scholar of immeasurable academic potential, administrative skill, and a human being of highest nobility. Again, my deep-hearted thanks also to His Excellency Minister Nazim Ibrahimo and Secretary General of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, Dr. Roshan Murado. I fully believe that it is due to the efforts of these people that the narrative of understanding, peace, tolerance, dialogue, and coexistence is gaining increased currency and enhanced attention of the world leaders and intelligentsia across the globe. Of course, under the auspices of NGIC, Club de Madrid, and Library of Alexandria. We all know that our globe is on razor's edge. The human civilization is challenged not only with the fatal environmental crisis, but also it is grilled within stark religious, cultural, and ethnic polarizations. The strategic exigencies and ambitions of world powers are assuming priority on all human values. The world is not only losing precious and youthful human resource due to conflicts, but is also loses the priceless and beautiful cultural infrastructure. The present anti-Islamic sentiments in the West originate or emanate from what is termed as Islamic fundamentalism. The Muslims, through international mass media, are deemed, defined, and projected as fundamentalists. By implication, they are being projected as a people who are deeply confused between the push of technology and pull of theology. They are deemed to be a people who do not have the requisite intellectual sophistication to negotiate the issues and the problems generated by the onslaught of modern science and technology. A people who are incapable of making rational and autonomous choices. They are also imagined to be a people devoid of applying discretionary powers of their own. They are considered literalists, revivalists, and fundamentalists. They are also considered to be a grenade throwing, gun toting, excruciatingly devastating terrorists of the highest order. The image of Muslim young men across Europe, Northern and Southern America, Australia, and large parts of Asia and Africa is that of blood chilling and ruthless practitioners of terror and violence. Thus, Muslims around the world are becoming an object of hate. What are our options and choices? How to go about all this? Perhaps we need to develop a long-term and multi-directional approach with a view to respond to this challenging situation facing the Muslim world. Furthermore, it has got to be a creative, dynamic, and an ongoing process. Muslims of the world need to respond to this challenge with highest intellectual sagacity, deep theological wisdom, and ideological profundity, and the finest diplomatic sophistication. Muslims also need to formulate a mature, balanced, and judicious Islamic response with a view to resolving the crisis and with the view to usher into an era of mutual peace and reciprocal tolerance. American and European Enlightenment has inaugurated a cultural and civilizational paradigm shift that has got the acceptability as a global reference culture. Scientific investigations and resultant technological applications have been the driving forces of contemporary Western civilization and culture, which is being reacted to positively or negatively by all of us. These globe-shaking developments have inspired and crystallized a new worldview and value system that is scientific, secular, liberal, and humanist. Islam, being an uncompromisingly theocentric and monotheistic worldview and value system, is contemporaneously pulled by Islamist or maximalist interpretations, but at the same time, it is pushed by modernist and minimalist interpretations. Contemporary Muslim thought and culture are caught in between the deep sea of Islamic discourse and the devil of modernist philosophy. The guiding values of Western culture, humanism, liberalism, egalitarianism, democracy, freedom of speech and conscience, tolerance and pluralism, are essentially integral to Islamic ethos and culture as well. The new international political and economic order, pioneered and appropriated by the West, poses a challenge to Oriental cultural paradigms in general and Islamic cultural paradigm in particular, which is getting increasingly difficult by the day to respond to. The contemporary Western cultural paradigm is not Christian in its orientation and direction. Its orientation and direction is dictated by rational, objective, and methodological criteria explored and designed by scientific perspective. That explains the transcultural appeal of the Western culture. The dictates of this technology-driven culture are obediently carried out in China and Japan, South Africa and West Asia, Eastern Europe and Latin America. The global scope and reach of Western culture is almost unavoidable. The technological marvels and wonders designed by Western ingenuity and even implements of daily use in agriculture and industry have flooded almost all Eastern societies, and even the luxuries offered by Western model of development tend to become our necessities within the time span of a decade or so. Whether we like it or not, we have both wittingly and unwittingly become a part of this technologically advanced culture. Our social, political, educational, and intellectual standards, values, norms, and tastes are inspired and determined by the daily sweep of the technological culture designed by the West. The consumeristic standards of behavior, have invaded our collective conscious and unconscious. All religious cultures, including Islamic culture, are caught in the crossfire of medieval understanding and interpretation of religion and the dictates of modern science and technology. The dilemma of Muslims is that they are the torch bearers of a highly consummate religious worldview and value system, and yet scientifically and technologically they are a backward people. How we respond to this paradoxical situation will determine our future cultural identity. This process of acculturation and enculturation has got to be accepted and meaningfully and creatively responded to. Secondly, Muslims should undertake wide-ranging and horizontal ijtihad with a view to resolving the contemporary issues. The understanding and the interpretation of Islam needs to be reoriented and revisited with a view to be cognizant of contemporary needs and requirements. Quran is a confirmatory book. It confirms all the books and all the prophets sent before Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Therefore, it must be one of the foremost tasks of the contemporary ijtihad to stress on the similarities of major world religions. The imperatives of world peace, mutuality, coexistence, and tolerance demand that we should iron out differences and underscore or focus on similarities. Terrorism in any form, howsoever, needs to be condemned by all quarters of world Muslim opinion, both governmental and non-governmental. Terrorism in any form is unacceptable to Islam. It is a remedy worse than the disease. The Quran has expressly taught us that killing of an innocent person amounts to the death of entire mankind, and saving the life of one person that amounts to the safeguarding of entire humanity. Thirdly, the most important task that Muslims of the globe need to do is a critical self-examination and going in for highest possible scientific advancement and technological achievement, so that they can become a factor in the world economy, polity, and society. Therefore, Muslims need to be scientifically and technologically and economically strong in order to command political respect amongst the community of nations. Lastly, Muslims need to stop being sentimental or emotional. They need to understand the subtleties of international diplomacy. They need to cultivate highest excellence in the art of discourse. They are technologically weak, and therefore they need to be diplomatically highly trained and sophisticated. I hope if you can work out the above suggestions and strategies and have a realistic assessment and evaluation of the West, and if we undertake multidirectional or horizontal ijtihad and cultivate science and technology and also imbibe the civility of discourse, we will go a long way in earning for us international respect, goodwill, and gratitude. Only then will the doors of mutual and reciprocal tolerance and appreciation be opened for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank our distinguished panel, and before opening the floor for discussion and debate, I would like to have a couple of questions just to jumpstart the discussion and the debate. yesterday and today have been extremely enriching for me in terms of the different perspectives around the topic that we are addressing. The question I have for all of us is, where are we going to be in 5 years and 10 years from today? Is the world going to be better, the same, or worse? Reflecting on what has been said to date, and I'm sure for the rest of the day, today and tomorrow, there is a lot that we can accumulate about the descriptive view of where we are and what got us there. And I see and I hear very important recommendations about the prescription of how to get out of where we are to where we should be. I belong to a school of the better worlds. And what I hear and I feel around the table and through the discussion we had, that there is a lot of commitment among each and every member of this distinguished panel and what he does, and by being here, and making it a better world. So the question is, can we come collectively with a pragmatic actions that can contribute to a better world? Yesterday, for example, His Excellency Amin al-Jumail proposed one concrete thing about knowing more about where we are, to have a center for Arab democracy. Again, today we've heard quite a lot from Dr. Abbenam and the others about the state of terrorism. Should we think about a center that can describe for us, report to the globe where we are, to complement whatever is there, to challenge whatever methodologies are there, and to make sure that descriptively we know where we are, rather than spending 100% of our time trying to argue about the cause of terrorism or the lack of democracy, security, all the issues that we have from one single perspective rather than the other. Second thing is, can we start and march actions regarding a better tomorrow, right from here? What do we do? Just ideas, reports, or real actions? I open the floor for comments and discussion. His Excellency طاهر المصري. تفضل يا فندم.
شكرا سيدي. يعني نحن
We
في العالم
are
العربي
today in the Arab world.
علينا أن نفتح بعض الملفات.
We should open some files. We should handle and approach some topics frankly and bluntly. I think one of the problems that we have today, that we are not building a genuine and a true state. We did not build before any democratic state. Our legislatures and our legislations and our laws are still old. Our legislatures are still talking about old ideas. We are still as Arab states and as Arab countries, we do not have safety or democracy the citizen, the Arab citizen feels that he is defeated. The Arab citizen feels that he lacks democracy. He feels like military is the best option. He feels like that the political Islam is sometimes the optimal way. We have to understand that even a lot of Islamic ideologies are failing. I think that we should have something stronger, something more comprehensive, something more strategic that could help us to get out of such bad situation. We should have something like protocol that can help the states. I think we need to put a program for renaissance for all the Arab states, and such a program should be imposed on all the peoples in order to understand what's happening in our societies. And I think that the leaders of the Arab world should also shoulder the responsibilities, and also other politicians.
دكتورة فريدة اتفضلي يا فندم.
Dr. Farida, you have the
دكتورة
floor.
فريدة العلاجي.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And I would like to add what my friend here said, Dr. Taha. I believe that the Arab Renaissance project, it has been more than 5 years we are talking about. I was a member of the Reformation program, and we are talking a lot about Arabic reforming programs. We are talking diplomatically. We are talking from a very diplomatic and very professional way, and sometimes we talk angrily. Yes, we have hundreds, dozens of Arab intellectuals that they are in jail and they are refrained nowadays, and they are marginalized. So who can achieve the target? Who can achieve the goal now? Now we are talking in the conference, who should or who can make the change? Political powers in the Arab world, they have everything. They have the control. The business society also, they have the power to change. Politicians also, they have the power to change. Now, we were displaced. We were also marginalized. We were also deprived of our rights. Now, we should talk bravely, we should talk pragmatically, and we should talk frankly. Now, we are talking about, we have hundreds of human rights organizations. We have a lot of conferences and thousands of recommendations. Now, we need someone who can, we need organizations that can follow up. I am a member of some organization, LISQA, and there is a report about the Arab justice, about the justice in the Arab world. Now, if we are asked, what is the action or what is the interaction? We are talking for 30 years about actions and about solutions and about recommendations and about the visions. Now, those who are power holders, either they should take an action or they should leave everything, because we have a lot of liars today. Some people are marginalized, and we know that. Yes, we are exerting efforts. I have to say that the Arab citizen is defeated. The Arab citizen feels defeat inside himself. We have a dilemma here. We have a very big problem. So we have to I'm not saying that to say that we should surrender, but we should continue in our fight. Now the question is how to make a change. And how do you think that we have to change the language of our discourse? Or what kind of a change we are talking about? We are repeating the same words in every conference. Is it logic that we are talking in the same way in every conference? And then we have dictators, and then we have after that dictators coming after the previous ones. I would like to talk in details later on, but I would like to listen to your comments now.
دكتورة فريدة
Dr. Farida.
تحية دكتورة فريدة.
I would like to welcome you. I would like to give you my welcoming.
Other comments? دكتور عبد العزيز توجي تفضل. الدكتور اسماعيل بعد.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to say good morning to all of you.
الوضع في المنطقة اليوم تغير
I think that the situation in the region today is radically different.
هي التي
It's not the same situation as it was in the past. So the situation is completely different. Yes, the Arabs witnessed change. They did not completely changing. Yes, we are saying a lot of slogans, right? That's true. But we are also backtracking. We are moving back in some other ways. We have sectarian slogans. We have some ethnic clashes. We have some foreign and external intervention. So we need to have a project. We need to have a big project. We should have a mechanism, and such a mechanism should be extended to Morocco and Senegal from the western side to Iraq and the eastern side. This land of civilization, this land of civilization helps to create and to build cultures. I'm sorry to say that the situation today, the current status and the status quo, makes all of us in a very big problem and in a dilemma. We are nowadays, we are in the same problem, and we created that problem together. Yes, today in this conference, we are facing, we are approaching such a problems, and we don't want to be involved in some trivial or non-important issues. We would like to be open and open-minded to different ways. So I listened to the speech to Amr Moussa yesterday. And also I was reading a report for Madeleine Albright, and also a report about the Middle East and the situation in the Middle East and what is the way out for the problems in the Middle East. So I said to Mr. Amr Moussa, they are planning and they are conspiring against us. So what we are doing now? I have to say that there is a complete and a total absence for the Arabs and Muslims today in international conventions and international events. We are not decision makers in some world and some global circles. For example, we have some international events that does not have any kind of Arab existence or Arab participation. So what we can see today, for example, in Syria, we have the Russians, we have the Iranians, we have the Turkish. Where are the Arabs? We have a lot of arguments here about that, and we have to learn different lessons from that in order to get out of such civilizational crisis that we are facing nowadays.
شكرا سيادة الرئيس. Mr. Chairman, I think there's an important point that needs to be added to what has been said. And this is that while the Muslim countries and the Arab countries in particular of the Middle East are certainly in the throes of enormous difficulties and outright warfare in many countries, there has been this image of a clash of civilizations, and it's being further exacerbated now by Mr. Trump's rhetoric and statements about banning all Muslims. Mr. Trump's national security advisor, Mr. Flynn, says that Islam is not a religion, it's an ideology, and that is disguised as a religion, and so on, which is further feeding this. But if you look at the facts, almost all the fighting statistically and by any other measure you want, is in Muslim countries, by Muslims against Muslims. Those who are fighting ISIS on the ground, the boots on the ground, are Muslims. And certainly the intra-Muslim problem is as great, if not greater, than any confrontation between Muslims and non-Muslims elsewhere. So that's fact number one. Fact number two is that there are therefore decisions being made, even de facto, if not de jure, by the decisions that are being made about who fights where. Some of these wars are declared, some are undeclared, but certainly there's a full set of confrontations going on, whether it is Libya, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, almost everywhere, Afghanistan, etc. All of these places, there are outright conflicts going on, and these conflicts are predominantly, if not 100%, but certainly very overwhelmingly between Muslims and Muslims. So we can't imply that either things are static or that things are not moving. I think what is happening is that we, as Farida said, we are concerned that these movements are not part of any sense of vision of where we're going. To take the most blatant example, what happens after the defeat of Daesh? If you defeat Daesh, what happens? I mean, there's no vision as to what would happen after that. There's no clarity of what happens. What will happen to the Kurdish parts who are fighting? What happens to the Shia militias? What happens to the others? And it's that absence of any coherent view that makes the actions of the Muslims in dealing with their own problems seem very haphazard and short-sighted. And Farida is right in that therefore prior errors are being repeated and likely further errors will happen again. And it's barely 100 years since Sykes-Picot, and to have a conference where non-Muslims and non-Arabs are deciding the future is no longer acceptable. So I think maybe there is a lot of intra-Muslim, intra-Arab work to be done before we re-enter the dialogue with the others.
Thank you. Professor Kazu Takahashi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hisham, please. I think your two questions really are the keys to the whole problems. We can think of issues before us in terms of time and geographic, from longest of 5,000 years to a day or two. Geography from just one village to a global society. Now, all of them are relevant, but the more I try to learn the issues involved, more I come to the same conclusion which I have had for a number of years. It is the discrepancy between the state and the nation. That is at the core of the problem. We have been strengthening the state for the past 70 years, whereas our efforts have not been equally strong in strengthening individual nations. And therefore, the gap between the state and the nation has been widening increasingly, ending up with marginalizing increasing number of populations, not only in this part of the world, but in various parts of the world. In recent period, the phenomenon is the same in Europe. And we are encouraging a fertile ground for extremism and terrorism by increasing the discrepancy between the state and the nation. And therefore, the solutions have to be related to the question how to strengthen nations. It may, to a large extent, depend on the cultural aspects of individual countries. For instance, in my country, Japan, in order to strengthen the nation, not the state, in order to strengthen the nation, we have been doing a number of things. For instance, in my country, baseball has been very popular. So, from among well over 4,000 high schools in different regions, competition after competition leading to two high schools competing with each other, the gradual process taking place for 3 months a year, a process of strengthening the nation building each year. We do it twice a year, and at the same time, in order to strengthen regional cultural backgrounds, festivities all around the country are encouraged by citizens not involving the state at all. There are a number of things which would strengthen the nation, and I think many of the activities can start today, and many of the things can bear fruits step by step tomorrow. And in 5 years, many of the things can be done. There are so many things which can be done. And therefore, rather than talking big, we have to talk small and pragmatic and do it in order to strengthen the nation rather than to build up the state. That's the essence of the matter, to fight against extremism and violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. By the way, I want to comment and reflect on every single input that's been done, but I'm moving. There is a lot of rich input that's coming now. Dr. Alaidi, and then Dr. Abdulmanem Said.
أنا الحقيقة يعني
Frankly, I'd like, from all what you have said, I think that the reality that the regimes in the region are following the same approach followed by the organizations we are talking about, whether we are talking about the Hakimi of the rules, okay, but we are talking about the powers and the authorities. However, we have some slight differences. If we look at the history from one totalitarian to another totalitarian regimes, even about the revolutions that aimed at liberating the countries, however, we oppressed the citizens. We need to take a look at it from a different perspective, since we have talking about the differences about what will happen in the near future. What about changing the mentality of the people? For the political administration, do they have the willingness to make the change? Do they have the willingness to make any kind of a change and change their own approach? Do they have the willingness? If they have the willingness, do they have the capability and the potential to do so? So I say that we want to get out of the box completely, because I have another question actually, because in the revolution in Europe, it was based on the religious authority. If we are talking about real revolution, so the revolution is against whom?
I'm always seduced by the Western saying that beware of what you wish, it might come true. Just a quick reaction to Dr. Farida's wish list, because for a moment, at least in Cairo, for 3 days, we got it, everything we watched. I mean, every liberal, everyone who want, respond to demographic change and the new youth, people with cutting edge technology that making the Arab Spring, and we ended with the most impoverished 5 years in our contemporary history. About 5,000 people in Egypt died, but about 500,000 in Syria. And the model was actually getting out the most organized, the most well-financed fascist movements to power. So we should very much be aware of what we wish, because it might come true. And we realize, actually, and that's my second point, that not everything is bad. And I will say that Egypt succeeded only in 1 year to overcome a fascist government and try again with a much, much better constitution that ever we had before. And we had a process going. Tunisia, in many ways, scored even better than Egypt. All the monarchies stood their feet, good or bad, whatever they have, but I guess at least a number of Arab countries succeeded in the last 5 years to really face a perfect storm in every aspect of it. Religion is a very big canon, is a very big thing to do in a highly conservative, traditional region. I think the one to be really, since I also participated in many of the works of the مركز دراسات الوحدة العربية or the Arab Unity Studies, and I have 3 books in it, and with others, I think Ismail and you and many others here. There is something wrong with us, I think. And why we failed, and we have to look at what we produced, how we dealt with the situation in its reality, and sometimes, and I will say, sometimes we were seduced by the Islamists. And that was, optimized by the Arab Islamic conferences that used to meet every year. And the Muslim Brothers and their affiliates actually succeeded to seduce us into the reality, or something that they call it a kind of civic society and civic state that proved when they came into power, it was outright fascism. So here I think the civic side of our, because we have actually the civic, the religious, and the military. These are the 3 powers that there is a problem with the civic. The ability of the civic to make reforms, the ability even to implement laws. So there is, in the judiciary and in our civil society and in our practices, we have, beacons of enlightenment, and I will consider, the Library of Alexandria one of them, and other places. However, we never really reached the critical mass enough to affect the people. Before, always, as if the battle was with the authority and power. Actually, the major battle we have is with the society. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me follow up on what. Further, Dr. Najim, please go ahead.
Now, I wish to point out that if at all the Arab nations make a strong introspection into the fact that if they are fighting the sectarian wars with each other, then they are committing a collective suicide. Because there is no scope whatsoever in the Islamic narrative of any sectarian differences. Then again, Arab nations should introspect that instead of being the fountainheads of enlightenment, Islamic enlightenment, they need to realize the fact that what makes them to fight with each other Is it the fight for the resources? If they allow themselves to be exploited as the people who have potential resources, then unfortunately, nobody from outside will come to invoke and to imbibe the wisdom in a person, in a people, in a society who don't care for their own good. لن يغير الله حتى ما يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. No power on earth, no conference, no debate, no discussion, no books, no literature is going to change the lot of those people who are not conscious about their own truth, about their own potential. So if the fighters are sectarian, then we need to have a religious discourse, again strongly, that Islam in no way permits the sectarianism. As I made it clear in the paper, that killing of one person tantamounts to the killing of whole humanity. This is the fundamental principle of Islam. Therefore, they are not doing any service neither to the Islamic religion nor to the humanity by fighting on the name of religion. There is no scope to fight on the name of religion. That's what I'm telling, that this is a collective suicide if the wars are on the name, in the name of religion or in the name of sects. Number two, they should also realize that isn't it that they are being exploited simply because they are resourceful people? Then one who is not able to protect his own resources, nobody in the world will come to safeguard him. Thus, the Arab nations in particular and the Muslims in general need to have a very, very strong introspection into their own lots. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me add one small reflection. Yesterday, many of the speakers mentioned that today's world population is about 7.4 billion. Out of this, in the Arab world, we have about 400 million. The Islamic world is 1.4 billion. By year 2050, all these figures will be doubled. We in the Arab world gonna be 800 million, out of which, right here in Egypt, we're gonna be more than a couple of 100 million. Right here, that's 2050. The Islamic world is gonna be double. So this is reflection number one. Second, with what I heard, there are few words that I haven't heard enough in our discussion, debates, introduction, which is the state of poverty in this world, the state of illiteracy, the status of education and quality of education, health, unemployment, etc., etc., etc. If we put this on the table and look at regions where problems occur, there might be something that comes out of this. Third reflection. To date, in addition to incompetent states, struggle, the debates that we're talking, I think some of us has reflected on the international system. United Nations, Security Council, international multinational organizations, etc., etc., all of which are the products of the Second World War. So in other words, today, 2017, we're still adopting the models that we devised in post-San Francisco and post the Second World War by inventing the UN system and related organizations. Little have been done in terms of applying and operationalizing the key principles that the founders of a better world have had in mind then. So the question that I have, do we need a better model? Do we need a modern model? Or we need to improvise, like I think one of our speakers mentioned, improvise or something which is already delivered the world that we are in. The fourth reflection is, I hear too much and a lot that we Muslims, we Muslims, we Muslims, we Arabs, we Arabs, we Arabs. And I'm simply a proud Muslim and a proud Arab. And the fact that there are extremism in this world, unfortunately, is not my product, but it's the generation product. It's our product. I've done a little bit of my homework, and so does the majority of the Muslims and the majority of the Arabs and the majority of humanity. But there is a product, reality, of terror and terrorist organizations, and I think it's an over-limitation to say that it is only a product of this country or this region or this religion. Yes, we need a mega reform in almost most, if not all, the states, as mentioned. Yes, we need a major reform in our religious institutions. I'm not talking only about Islam, I'm talking about all religious, about the role of religion, which is, we have the same problems that we had across history between relationship between the religious institutions and the state and power, etc., etc., etc. All these comments call for something to be done. Either we can sit passively, somebody else think for us, either in Asitana or in Washington or in London or wherever it is, or we can start thinking of where we want to be and where we should be. Either I think in a village, I love the comment of Professor Caso about think small and act small. Maybe we can start from kindergarten, and we start from a village, or start from a school, or start from a country, or we need as well to start from the world, or maybe we start top down and bottom up. But all of us need to start, because otherwise, I don't think we have reached yet the stability or the end of extremism. The worst yet to come. The next day of what's has happened in Iraq, what is happening in Syria, what has happening in Libya, yet to come. There is huge, expectedly, a reaction of what happened until we reach stability. Are we going to reach a better world in 5 years, in 10 years, in 100 years? We need to contain that. We need to try to devise that. And it is not only a one country or a one region problem, it's a collective problem of the world. And would be a pity to think about this meeting that this is going to be just another conference. Dr. Farida mentioned that we have had lots of studies, lots of plans, lots of conferences. So I'm looking to the distinguished group under this distinguished organization, the Library of Alexandria, both are biased to, and I would like to see something that's happened. Can we envision that this group is like the group who met in San Francisco, who then started to trigger the whole world by thinking through that peace, that economic development, that social development is better than wars, weapons, and destruction? Can we think about what can we do big and what can we do small so that we move in action? Can we think about a framework? Can we think about putting together the top 100 movers and shakers in one room and make sure that there is something concrete that can be done from a roadmap rather than having Moscow drive on one side the geopolitics of a region, or Washington drives the other side? Or can we think about there is a group, I see many of them around this table, who can pull together this world to start thinking about the big and small and put a framework where we can act? Other questions, please. Dr. Masri, تفضل.
سيدي يعني يجب أن أيضا
Well, sir, I think
إلى وضع جديد قد
We need to think of the new situation that might develop into a difficult one. It's about the dialogue of civilization now. If we go to the Western world, they ask us, why do you hate us? And when they come to us, we ask them, why do you hate us? That feeling of reciprocal hatred is very dangerous, and I think it is evolving in a clear manner because of terrorism, because of rightist thoughts, and because of the refugees who fled to Europe. But most importantly, we need to find a solution for the Palestinian crisis. If we want to start from the basics, you have to help us solve the chronic problems, especially the Palestinian issue. Some of the Western countries say that the Palestinian issue is no more the basic. However, it is still the basic issue, and it has become more complex. It has become very dangerous because of the injustice of the rulers towards their people. When we see what happened in Iraq and the murdering of the people of Iraq and the destruction of Gaza and the rulers who are not able to do anything, so the citizen will feel humiliated, he will feel grudge, he will feel anger. So we have to talk clearly, and we have to talk frankly and be courageous. It's not that simple. It used to be simple, but now it's more complicated. You wait and watch what will happen when Israel gives more support to that America will give more support to Israel, and about putting the embassy in Jerusalem.
It's
See
exactly
what will
90
happen.
minutes from the time we started. والتزاما بالوقت. Anybody has any comments, closing comments? دكتور تويجري تفضل حضرتك.
هي فقط ملاحظة صغيرة. الوضع في
We have
المنطقة
just a little comment about this. It's the what's happening in the region. It's transformed from differences between the people of one nation to confrontation between two projects.
مشروع خارج إطار الدولة العربية
And
الكبرى أو المنطقة العربية الكبرى.
a project outside the Arab region and a project inside the Arab region.
المشروع الذي أتى من خارج
So
المنطقة
the
العربية
outside region projects
ليكسب
expanded so that they can gain ground in the Arab world, and they achieve many of their objectives in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and other areas. We have to be very clear.
الحديث حول هذه النقطة
when we talk about this issue in particular, the Palestinian issue is now a card, a paper used by others, exploited by others, so that they can make advances in their projects. I think that the whole picture, it's not related to the Arab world, but it's related to Africa, Asia, and other places outside the Arab world, and related to the minorities, especially in Latin America. And in other places, we have a lot of projects, and we want to talk about our main principal project that will maintain the nationalism and the racial nationalism, rationalism of the Arab world, emanating from the principles and teachings of Islam, and try to avoid the sectarian sedition. Thank you, sir.
نحيي حضراتكم.
Thank you all.
معالي السيد عمرو موسى. تفضل يا فندم.
Mr. عمرو موسى.
شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will talk in brief because we've passed the 90-minute limits. Okay, I listened to all the interventions who've been all pessimistic about what's happening in the Arab world and the Islamic world, and maybe the third world as well. I consider that it's really important to talk about in an optimistic tone, even if it's a weak and low tone. First, we shouldn't forget that more than 60 to 70% of the Arab peoples are youth. And this youth are looking forward to the future, and they are trying to change the way they deal with the affairs of their lives, despite that there a huge percentage of illiteracy. However, now those youth can communicate with others around the world. They are now educated, even outside the school, but now if you are trying to be well educated, they get some international ideas that are of interactive nature, and vice versa. Second, about the Tunisian and Egyptian example, about the rule based on religion has been rejected and collapsed. The same what happened in Egypt and in Tunisia, so people can reject imposing any kind of situations. People need understanding about the paradigm and the framework that we will deal with in the future. Third, now we are not talking about one Arab state and all that nonsense. We are talking about the Arab world. Muslims, Christians, Sunni, Shia, Arab, Kurds, and Amazigh. This is the Arab world now, and this is the idea dealing with now. We are not just talking about religious clash, about sectarian clash. This is a very long fight that has already started. Now, I want all of you to understand that the current of change has started in the Arab world. It has started already, and we can never have any kind of situation that would be imposed upon us. We will fight, we have a commotion. It might be slow commotion, however, the situation is changing in the Arab world. We cannot say that this situation is just a revolution or an uprising. No, this is a change. The change has started, and accordingly, we need to draw on it, and we need to benefit from it. So, please, I would like to greet the panelists and the attendees, and thank you so much for this session. Thank you.